Hi, welcome to the Go Higher Frequency Astrology channel. My name is Suzanne. Join me as I investigate how the monthly cycles are progressing with a focus on how we can use this energy more productively. Wow. Well, I did promise that this new year would start with a bang, and it sure did. So much has happened since I last posted my full moon video that this video is going to be jam-packed with chart analysis. Before I talk about this upcoming new moon in Capricorn happening on January the 18th, I want to talk about how the capture of Maduro aligns with a pattern of US intervention in other countries when Saturn and Neptune meet up every 36 years. I'll also be taking a look at the chart of the Monroe Doctrine to see how this North America sphere of influence might play out. I'll also be reviewing the chart of the horrific killing of a United States citizen in Minneapolis by a member of ICE on January the 7th. As always, I've left timestamps below, so feel free to jump around to the topics that interest you the most. Now, if you watched my full moon in Cancer video, you'll remember that I talked about the nodes switching into the channel of community, or us versus them. I talked about the line being a line of decapitation. And in that video, I mentioned that it might be heads rolling within Trump's administration, but it was actually Maduro. And I found people referring to Maduro's capture as a decapitation. So I'm going to play you a clip right now.
We've been saying for months on this podcast, clearly this is about regime change. Clearly, it was a decapitation exercise.
Once I looked at the chart for Venezuela, I understood the timing of this capture a whole lot more. Venezuela happens to have its natal sun within 1 degree orb of the US's sun, so the full moon also aspected their sun. Not only that, but their independence chart also happened during a full moon. Remember, all of the personal planets were out of bounds, so this full moon promised to be over the top. And this capture certainly fit the bill. I also found it interesting that Pluto is conjunct the South Node in Pisces in the country's chart, with transiting Saturn and Neptune nearby. This transit is creating a T-square with natal Saturn in Sagittarius on one side and Venus, Jupiter, and Mercury in Gemini on the other. And it's aspecting the president's natal planets in Sagittarius and Gemini. And the country's Saturn aspecting the president's moon is not a pleasant connection. It was rumored that his irritation with Maduro dancing is what made him decide to pull the trigger. Not shown in this specific chart, but the country's progressed Saturn is perfecting a conjunction with the country's natal moon, illustrating the mutuality of this moment. This confirms that the country's people are likely feeling oppressed, both emotionally and materially. As I was researching the cycles, I noticed that the Saturn-Neptune cycle seems to coincide with US interventions or coups. For instance, when Saturn and Neptune met up in Leo in 1917, the US intervened in Russia, supporting the anti-Bolsheviks to suppress communism. And when Saturn and Neptune met up in Libra in 1953, the prime minister of Iran was overthrown in a coup orchestrated covertly by the CIA in partnership with the United Kingdom. The reason? The country had nationalized its oil reserves. It's interesting to note that now that we're heading into the Aries cycle, the opposition, Trump's aim in Venezuela seems to be taking us back to this concessionary system that used to be in place before countries started nationalizing their resources. Under the previous system, producer states own the oil, but Western firms manage production and marketing, ultimately retaining the bulk of the profits. 20 years after the coup, a serious backlash occurred, which installed the current regime, which was much worse than the old regime. Are we repeating a cycle? The Aries cycle is ruled by Mars, so it's going to be much more confrontational. Libra is ruled by Venus, so it's more diplomatic. As Stephen Miller recently said, we are done with the niceties. We are into Aries domination now. Since our country was founded when Saturn was in Libra, This approach is inconsistent with the values this country was founded on. There's definitely something to be said about being upfront rather than covert, but our distaste of dominance by force is why we broke free from England in the first place. You're shining a bright light on this shadow side of our country. Do we want to be a country that steals other countries' resources? To what end? And when should we intervene when a country's leaders are oppressing their own citizens so much that they're invading our country? And how much should we take from a country if we intervene? If we are simply replacing an internal devil with an external devil, how does this make sense? The people of that country should benefit from their own resources first and foremost. Don't you think? And in 1989, when Saturn and Neptune met up in Capricorn, we set up a coup to depose dictator Manuel Noriega from Panama. He was supposedly suppressing democracy and supporting Colombian drug cartels, but had resisted relinquishing control after drug indictments. This was the reasoning given to Congress at the time. And since this conjunction happened in Capricorn, which is more about state structure, the administration did notify Congress of this coup. Our own independence happened right after a Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 18 degrees Virgo. So as a country, we are beginning a new Saturn-Neptune cycle. Saturn is coming into a semi-sextile with Neptune in our founding chart. So we've been dancing with a full moon of our natal Saturn-Neptune cycle. Saturn and Neptune have been opposing natal Neptune and is now coming to oppose our natal Saturn. So this is where we face the reality behind our country's spiritual principles, who we say we are versus who we actually are underneath. This administration has been putting out a lot of disinformation, but there is one thing they have been quite honest about. Total domination is the goal, and will take it by force if necessary. This has been an undercurrent of our country for a very long time, but it's being spoken out loud now for everyone to examine. Is this really who we want to be in the world? Is this who we are as a country? The other chart I want to look at is the Monroe Doctrine chart, or the Monroe Doctrine chart, as it's being called by our president. This is nothing new. The chatter about spheres of influence or network states, or more optimistically becoming a multipolar world where no one dominates, has been discussed both inside and outside of astrological circles for some time. In Trump's first term, Fiona Hill famously testified about Russia's interest in exchanging Venezuela for Ukraine. And there are multiple indications in the charts that Ukraine is in danger right now. Whether this is actually a hidden intention remains to be seen, but it seems we are taking one step closer toward this vision. President James Monroe delivered the Monroe Doctrine as part of his 7th annual message to Congress on December the 2nd, 1823. AI clocks the delivery at 12 p.m. It was a significant annual address outlining U.S. foreign policy, warning European powers against further colonization or interference in the Americas, in exchange for the U.S. not meddling in European affairs. Now, this was experimented with, but I don't think it was very successful. The one thing I noticed right away about this chart was the ascendant at 28 degrees, which is the very degree of the upcoming February eclipse. The second thing I noticed is Pluto being at the Aries point, which will be activated during the Saturn-Neptune conjunction right after the eclipse. Ebertein's description of the combination of Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto is difficult growth, illness, and depression. It's like it's creating new power structures while dissolving others, which leads to a cyclical nature that accomplishes nothing. It goes nowhere. I also noticed that the chart has a signature that pretty much tells a similar story. Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, and Mars are in a grand trine with each other. There's a lack of stamina, there's instability and misguided direction in this chart. There have been multiple threats about who might be next on the chopping block. The pattern seems to be that this administration likes making a splashy example of one or two targets and then to resort to extortion of the other targets. What I'm going to be doing is a light analysis based on country charts. So it's meant to be an experiment with analysis. I'll analyze and then we'll tighten our analysis once real events play out. So let's start with Colombia. Donald Trump confirmed that he spoke with the leader of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, and that they would be meeting soon. Petro has been combative, but he's not long in office. He's also the first left president in recent history, so it would appear ramping up threats would be counterproductive here. But Colombia also has a Cancer sun, and it will be opposing the Cancer new moon, with Mars and Mercury applying to an opposition to the sun. Colombia also has a Mars-Mercury signature in their chart, with Jupiter approaching a conjunction. There have been a lot of angry protests over what has happened in Venezuela. The threats are rallying people around their country. The country was founded when Saturn and Neptune met up in Sagittarius, and so this next Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries will be in a trine relationship. It would appear they will fall easily into this new cycle, but the Cancer stellium adds challenge. The country's Venus is at the very same degree of Trump's ascendant, and with his Mars involved, it's likely there will be engagement. Since Gustavo Petro will be leaving office soon, it might make more sense for them to rally behind the next candidate. Cuba's chart is also aspecting this new moon. Cuba's natal sun is in Taurus, and it's in a trine relationship with natal Saturn in Capricorn. This is a country that is tremendously stuck in its ways, patriarchal, used to doing without, soldiering on. But with this new moon highlighting natal Saturn and Uranus conjunct its natal sun, huge shifts are coming. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction is in square with natal Neptune in Gemini right now, and there have been news reports that this country is already in free fall. It looks like this is going to be a pretty easy dissolution and reorganization of the country. Another country in Trump's eye is Mexico. And based on a recent interview, it seems like he's ready to strike cartels in Mexico. But I think Mexico is going to be a little more complex to target aggressively. The new moon trines the sun in Virgo. So if you're just looking at transits to Mexico's chart, doesn't appear there will be any immediate confrontations. What I do find interesting about their chart is that Mexico gained independence the same year that Colombia did in 1810. So they were also founded during a Saturn-Neptune cycle in Sagittarius. But unlike Colombia, natal Jupiter is applying to an opposition with Saturn-Neptune. So along with the trine of Saturn-Neptune, there's a sextile to Jupiter. There are opportunities here in this new cycle. Uranus is coming to conjunct natal Jupiter soon, so a change is definitely coming, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative change. The country's south node is in Aries, ruled by a Mars in Leo, in aspect to Trump's natal Mars. A complementary drive. Mexico has history here and holds more cards than Colombia. The Aries ingress chart has Mars applying to natal Pluto. So there will definitely be power struggles, but Mexico seems to have an advantage. Now, outside of North America, there is, of course, Iran, and political unrest has already started. There's been days of protests. Iran also has a Mercury-Mars signature in its chart, with Saturn and Neptune transiting this conjunction right now. This transit is being highlighted by the new moon in a sextile configuration. The south node is also conjunct natal Saturn in Virgo. Iran has been experiencing a midlife crisis with Uranus opposing natal Uranus. I wouldn't be surprised if the protests led to a more serious crisis. Saturn has come to exact its toll. The new moon is also squaring Kamini's sun, and he has some pretty serious health aspects in his chart right now. He's in his mid 80s, and he hasn't been seen since July. There have been recent reports in the news that he may flee to Russia if the protests become too intense. So I am suspecting that they are already aware that something more drastic is on the horizon. And now we come to Greenland. Greenland has been in the news once again, to everyone's consternation. I'm sharing a chart of Denmark. Christine Skinner shared this date on a recent episode of hers. She got it from the World Horoscope book, so I had to look it up. What I found interesting about this chart is that Trump's Sun, North Node, and Uranus are on the midheaven, and they share an out-of-bounds Mercury in Cancer. So he shares a deep connection with Denmark, and it's no wonder why he thinks Greenland is his to take. Denmark has Neptune on the South Node, and it's in a trine relationship with Mercury. Saturn keeps Mercury in check as it squares the natal planet. The Aries ingress chart will have a Mercury North Node conjunction at exactly 8 degrees. Denmark will also be experiencing a reverse nodal return. It's a time when we revisit themes from our past. Denmark will also be experiencing a Saturn return during this time. So there definitely appears to be some sort of karmic reckoning happening right now. And it makes me want to research the country's history a bit more. So I might come back to this chart in a future episode. I want to talk really quickly about the recent killing of a US citizen in Minneapolis by a member of ICE. Venus and Mars were lined up in the heart of the sun, with Jupiter approaching an opposition. Right away, we had leaders of our country jump to conclusions about the nature of the shooting, describing her as a domestic terrorist. But the evidence clearly paints another picture. Now, why she was blocking the path of ICE with her car, or why she decided to suddenly drive away, is definitely up for question. But in no way does it look like the ICE member was in danger or that he was acting in self-defense. And so the characterization of her as a domestic terrorist is just false, in my opinion. Jim Stewart, a Substack writer focused on disinformation and psyops, calls this a new Reichstag plot, a new wave of domestic oppression. Now, whether this is true or not, it did happen on the incarnation cross of penetration. And the theme of this side of the cross is about ambition, a covert operation to get what one wants. It's basically planting a seed for future blossoming. It's paving the way. It's the entry point to something bigger. Now, there are a lot of seeds being planted right now. It seems to be that they are trying to escalate a broader crackdown, especially as we approach the midterm elections, which seem to be pretty dicey for Trump right now. People are comparing this shooting to George Floyd, who was killed nearby by excessive police force in 2020. He was killed by regular police members, not an ICE member. But it is very common for police to use excessive force when it comes to Black people. Not so much with white people, but ICE members are being excessively aggressive to anyone and everyone in their path. I have the event chart in the middle and the Minneapolis chart on the outer wheel, since I have an exact time of the event, but not the Minneapolis founding chart. What I noticed right away was that the city was founded during a full moon, with the transiting nodes exactly aspecting the moon in Virgo. I also noticed that Mars is hugging the event chart's ascendant. Now, when you look at George Floyd's event chart against this event chart, Neptune is also on the ascendant. So there are memories. There are collective memories of his killing. A wound has been resurfaced. Minneapolis went through a Uranus return in 2021. the year after George Floyd's killing. There's a lot of reckoning that's happened in Minneapolis. It's been a specifically hard time for Minnesota in general, with senators being executed and past fraud being exploited by Trump. I also want to point out that Minneapolis has quite a lot of energy on the full moon in their chart. They have a Neptune, Mercury, Mars conjunction with the sun. You see this theme of the Mercury Mars conjunction showing up in so many charts lately. We are all learning about the weaponization of language and the use of force in circumstances like protests. These planets are all in a T-square configuration with Saturn. Saturn has come to exact its toll once again. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction is going to conjunct Minneapolis's Venus. It's almost as if it already has. So Minneapolis is definitely a catalyst, a turning point as we move forward into this new cycle. So I might come back to this chart in a future episode. Okay, let's talk about the upcoming new moon in Capricorn. This is the fourth of 6 new moons at the 28th degree, with the 5th new moon being the solar eclipse in February, and the 6th new moon will be in Pisces. So it will close out the cycle that we've all been moving through, releasing whatever we've needed to release since the eclipse at the 29th degree of Virgo, squaring Neptune at the 29th degree of Pisces. The pace has quickened as we attempt to remove shackles of the old to forge something new. There's a tension between the structure of Capricorn and the anarchy of Aquarius. This does not make this new moon any less intense, with Mercury and Mars both applying and under the beams of this new moon, and Venus separating from the new moon and applying to Pluto on the other side. And until the end of January, all the personal planets will meet with Pluto one after the other, with Mars finally triggering Pluto right after Neptune shifts more permanently into Aries. It's home until 2039. Mars rules Neptune in Aries, so they will now be working together. And Mars in Aquarius triggers revolutionary energy, especially as it moves into the latter degrees of Aquarius. Protests, fighting for our rights, fighting for a cause, will all happen as Mars moves into the later degrees of Aquarius, and Mars will be at the gate of revolution during the Saturn-Neptune eclipse. We will soon get a breath of fire, leaving behind the chaos of Pisces. Saturn and Neptune together at these last degrees of Pisces is one of the reasons we are experiencing so much out of control chaos right now. Anything that has been hanging on by a thread is being washed away. We are receiving some final lessons about the nature of chaos and how we can master it in a world that seems to have gone mad. But what we can change versus what we can't change is Pluto's domain. Pluto can cause chaos as well. But with Pluto, we meet the limits of our personal power to change our circumstances. Pluto can smack down hubris in a flash. It's often during these moments when we think we've done something great that we take our eye off the ball and we get whacked. Speaking of Capricorn, Dane Rudyard tells us that this is the phase of life in which the state assumes control over the individual. This is what we're seeing play out in the world with our seizing of Venezuelan oil reserves, the state assuming control over the sovereignty of other countries. This new moon reminds us to respect our limits, both as individuals, but also as those who seek to organize and restrict the individual. The new moon is on the cross of laws. Its theme is enlightened self-interest that naturally handles restrictions and limitations, ensuring identity and security. Or it ignores limitations and pays the price. After we meet Pluto and process our limitations, ready or not, a big shift is in front of us, with Uranus going direct on February 3rd, leading into the eclipse on February the 17th. Saturn-ruled Capricorn is one of the hardest moon placements. Saturn puts huge restrictions on the moon's natural expressiveness, creating deep repression and inarticulate sadness. perhaps even a chronically melancholic nature. And many of us are feeling grief over the senseless killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis. The ruler of the moon, Saturn, at the last degrees of Pisces, conjunct Neptune in the 10th house, is forming a mini talent trine with this new moon in the 8th house and Uranus in the 12th house of the standalone chart located in Washington, D.C. Saturn-Neptune is also creating a T-square with the angles of this chart at the last degree of Gemini and Sagittarius. We need to direct our energy toward the last degree of Virgo to find release. We are facing the dark truth about our current reality and processing our current limitations about what we can and cannot change. We need to find our focus. We cannot let the masters of chaos take away our sanity. There is an opportunity for mutation during this new moon to ascend our limitations, to take advantage of whatever opportunities rise to the surface during this orchestration on the world stage that is meant to distract us from what is essential. As Bill Carlson writes in The Gospel and the Zodiac, the master, the divine self within each of us is asleep and needs to be awakened so that we can direct our attention towards our goal and not be caught in the frantic rush of activity, which dissipates our energies and weakens our resolve. Now, if you remember, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is on the cross of the sleeping phoenix. It's about waking up to the reality of where we're at and either embracing being awake or falling back asleep. So we have a choice, but the choice right now is to not get caught up in all of the distractions to a paralyzing degree. It makes us ineffective. It can make us so exhausted. We have no energy to apply towards something that can get us out of this fuckery that we found ourselves in and to offer new optimistic ideas to the collective. So this is the meditation for this new moon. I hope you received it well. I have an upcoming presentation for OPA about the Antichrist, and it's been very illuminating about this cycle as well. I'll be sure to share it on my channel once I have done the presentation. So I hope to see you soon, and I hope there is more optimism coming. That's it for now.